Okay guys, so right now we do understand how glucose we do understand how carbohydrates get they get broken down, digested, absorption into the blood, how they get into the blood from the enterocytes, and then how do they enter different cells. Okay, now let's talk about okay, briefly, let's just go back a bit. So here is our stomach, our small intestine, and our enterocytes with a brush border. Okay, so, and this is our blood vessels. Yeah? So we have managed to eat whatever carbs we were eating, managed to get them broken down. Now we've got our monosaccharides there, glucose, galactose, fructose. Now our glucose has been absorbed through the different transporters into the blood. Now we've got glucose in the blood. We have explained, or we have discussed, how glucose enters the pancreas, the beta cells, how it enters the hepatocytes. So this is through the GLUT2, and how glucose enters the adipose cells and the muscles through the GLUT4 transporters. Okay, now if we can talk about what actually happens now with diabetes, we know that with diabetes you've got a chronic state of hyperglycemia. So you're not able to move your glucose from the blood into these cells or tissues. Remember guys, I said that, just want to get a different marker. I said that GLUT2, they are insulin independent. GLUT4, insulin dependent. So for them to actually be able to uptake glucose, they need insulin. And we said that GLUT4 are the major role players when it comes to glucose uptake. As much as diabetes does not affect the GLUT2, because we are still able to uptake glucose into the beta cells and also into the hepatocytes, but GLUT2 is not so potent, doesn't really cause a lot of glucose to move into these two organs. So diabetes is centered around GLUT4, right? Okay, so where are the potential problems that can give us diabetes, which is a chronic state of hyperglycemia? First of all, we said that when you've got hyperglycemia, glucose will enter the beta cells. So if you can have a problem with your GLUT2, say now, because GLUT2, they are the ones that sense hyperglycemia and allow glucose to enter the cells so that insulin release can occur from the beta cells. So if you can have a problem, maybe a genetic problem that actually destroys or makes the GLUT2 not to function, you will have a problem sensing insulin. But I have not seen anything like that on literature. But by just looking at it and trying to understand, you can actually get diabetes. Because if you can't sense glucose using the GLUT2, it means you won't the beta cells won't be able to initiate necessary steps to actually release the insulin, right? Okay, number 2, if you can have a problem within the cell, let's say you've got a problem with you cannot depolarize, because remember, for insulin to be actually released, you need that cell to depolarize by opening the calcium channels. Let's say you've got a problem with the calcium channels. I'm sure there are other explanations of how you can have hyperglycemia. I'm just going to go through these ones. So if you've got a problem with your calcium channels, then you might have a problem releasing insulin. And also, if you cannot produce insulin, which is this one, is a known pathophysiology, because people who've got type 1 diabetes, they've got destruction of beta cells. So because the whole beta cell is destroyed, they can't produce insulin. What if you can produce insulin because it's a hormone, but the insulin that you are producing is malformed? Let's say you've got insulin structural abnormalities like that. I'm just like this is not. I've not read this anything. I've not read this on any book or any journal, but I'm just going through this. Okay, so, but the one that is described in the book is the production problem of insulin. And also, the insulin has got to bind on its receptors. Problem with insulin sensitivity is when there is a problem with your receptors, right? So, the receptors that you find on these cells, we know that gives you diabetes. So, and also, let's say now your GLUT4s, they are expressed but they are malformed, they cannot take in glucose. Or they can't be expressed even in the presence of insulin. So those are the things that can give you diabetes. I'm sure there are others as well, and I'm sure these are, I mean, for anyone to prove that there's something called GLUT2 mutation, gene mutation, or whatever, this will be proven, and this will need to be proven. But the ones that we know for sure is receptor problem, insulin production, insulin insensitivity. Those ones we know, right? Okay. Now let's talk about, maybe using a cap from theater. Now let's talk about something interesting, something very, very, very interesting. So guys, why do we tell or advise patients to exercise when they are diabetic? This is the reason. This is the reason why we advise patients who are diabetic to exercise. It's because, remember, on the muscles, you've got insulin receptors, right? And the type of glucose transporter that is found there is a GLUT4. So that GLUT4 stays inside the cell, and when insulin binds to the receptor, that GLUT4 becomes expressed, right? So this is how it happens. Insulin is released, insulin comes and binds on the receptor on the cell surface of the muscle. Now, when insulin has bind to the receptor, the GLUT4, they are expressed on the cell membrane, and glucose starts now to enter, because glucose would come in and bounce, would come in and sort of like, as long as there's no gate for the insulin to enter, it will keep just bouncing off like that, bouncing off like that. But when it finds a GLUT4 transporter, it will enter. So in the absence of insulin, the GLUT4 transporters are inside the cell, but when insulin comes and bind on the receptor, the GLUT4, they become expressed, and then insulin and glucose now can start to enter the cell, right? Can start to enter the cell now, the glucose, ne? Now, when you exercise, when you are exercising, you've got a muscle and you've got a receptor, insulin receptor, and you've got those GLUT4s inside. Exercise on its own causes the expression of the GLUT4 transporters. This is how, because remember, when you're exercising, the body is like, I'm not going to wait for insulin because I'm exercising. I'm not going to wait for insulin to actually open, because the muscle, I need glucose. So I'm not going to wait for insulin to come before I can express my GLUT4. So in this case, during exercise, GLUT4 expression happens, or it occurs without the presence of insulin, right? So now when you exercise, you are able to drop your blood sugar without the presence of insulin. That's the beauty. That's why we advise patients to actually exercise, because you make you are able now to take in glucose in the absence of insulin. And remember, in both the two types of diabetes, you have a problem with insulin. You have a problem with insulin. So now, if you can be able now to do the job of insulin, which is to take glucose into the cell without the insulin, then you are gonna want to do that. So exercise, that's why it's very important. Okay. Now let's talk about what happens when you are diabetic and you are on insulin and you exercise. When you are same muscle, same receptors, you are exercising, so you are going to express GLUT4s on your muscle cell surface. So now let's say when you are not exercising, you take your insulin. Let's say you take 10 international units of insulin, you inject yourself, you are not exercising, and you are able to maintain normal glycemia. Just on that 10 international units. Now, when you exercise, you are bringing in a second mechanism, because remember, the insulin that you inject yourself with will take the glucose into the cell, right? And give you a state of normal glycemia. Now, when you are exercising, you are bringing in a second method of taking glucose from the blood into the cells, which is the exercise, like we explained with how exercise causes the upregulation and the expression of GLUT4 glucose transporter. Now, it means now, if you can get to normal glycemia by 10 units of insulin, bringing in a second method of taking in glucose, you will drop to hypoglycemia. So that's why when you are exercising, when you are diabetic and you are going for exercise, you need to adjust your insulin, so that during the exercise you don't get into hypoglycemia. And if you have not mastered how to adjust your insulin, rather carry a sugary drink as you exercise, so that when you feel dizzy and blah blah blah, you feel very lethargic, very weak, you know that, okay, I need sugar, and then you just because if you exercise with a glucose of, let's say, of 8, you're exercising. I mean, 8 is normal, it's fine, you can function with a blood sugar of 8. But now when you also have insulin in the blood that we have injected yourself with, that insulin remains active. it remains active, because remember, endogenous insulin can be regulated, but the exogenous one, once you put it in, it's going to keep working for 24 hours or for 12 hours, depending on the type that you're taking, but most of it is like 12 hours. So it's going to continue to work. But now when you exercise, you are going to, the little glucose that you have, the 8 that you have, upregulating GLUT4 because of exercise will further decrease the blood sugar that is 8. So that's why you need to adjust your insulin. Guys, I hope you love that. And I hope that you're going to subscribe to my channel. Hope that you're going to like, you're going to comment. Thank you.